Good. I think we're working. Thank you very much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's wonderful for me to be back here in Mexico City. I was here most recently last October. My group in Manchester have an ongoing collaboration with scholars here in Mexico and there was a symposium as part of that collaboration on stem cells earlier in the program. So I feel like a native of this country, if not this city, and I'm very pleased to be back here. Now, one of the provocations I sometimes am guilty of is that I change the title of my talk at the last minute, which is what I've done today. So the title in your programs is not what you're going to hear if I survive long enough to deliver it. But if you feel shortchanged, if you feel cheated by that fact, then if you email me after this program, when I get back to the UK, I will email you the talk I was due to give, so you won't have lost the benefits of any little wisdom that I might have. I've become interested recently in mind reading. Now, you may think this is a rather bizarre occupation for a philosopher interested in science, but I will explain. The idea, the possibility of reading the mind from the outside, or indeed from the inside, introspection, and I'll come back to introspection in a minute, has exercised humanity from the earliest times. Indeed, the earliest reference I could find to mind reading is in Homer. But I'm not going to quote from Homer at the moment. Recent advances in neuroscience have offered some probably remote prospects of improved access to the mind. But there is a different branch of technology which looks as though it is going to be much more effective as an agent of mind reading. Soul searching is not identical with mind reading, nor is mind reading identical with, even if it were possible to achieve such a thing, a complete description of brain activity. An analog here may be the relationship between genetics and epigenetics. Many neuroscientists, and indeed philosophers of neuroscience, seem stuck in an era equivalent to genetic essentialism and oblivious to the era of epigenetics and its cerebral equivalent. My suggestion is that motives, desires, intentions, attitudes, and both external and first-person access to these stand to a map of the brain or a description of brain activity as understanding the behavior of a creature or an organism stands to a map of its genome. We know from contemporary epigenetics that the behavior of genes, gene expression, is influenced by the coding of the genes, but also by environmental factors, as well as, for example, being modulated by patterns of inhibitors and promoters other than DNA that are set up within the cell and are effectively self-perpetuating. Wittgenstein famously remarked, in connection with establishing the reference of a remark, of a piece of speech, establishing what object or what incident was being referred to in a sentence in a normal language, he said, if God had looked into our minds, he would not have been able to see there of whom we were speaking. Why is that? Well, who we were referring to, if I refer to our chairman in unflattering terms about his breach of confidentiality, that is not given by the contents of my mind. Why? Because reference is given by context, not by brain activity. In the case of ethics, for example, and indeed, I'll give you one moral instance, the answer to the question, is this act murder or is this act rape, is not to be found in states of the brain. Not least because in the case of rape, the consent or otherwise of the other party is not to be found in the brain state of the putative rapist. Mind reading and the relationship between the face, particularly the eyes, and the contents of the mind and indeed the soul, if you prefer to use that term, has been and remains a fascination for humankind. This preoccupation reflects an interesting fact about ourselves. We want to read the minds of other people. We want to read our own mind. We want this so that we can understand what kind of person the bearer of the mind is, who we have to deal with, how they're likely to behave, what they want, what they're likely to do, what they have done. And we need to know these things about ourselves quite as much as about others. What manner of man am I? What sort of woman are you? Mind reading, if it can be done, would be a powerful cognitive enhancer, and like all knowledge, a significant source of power. The image of the eyes, even slightly shrouded by specs, the image of the eyes or the face as windows into the mind or the soul often plays a seminal role in the imagery used to discuss the project of mind reading. Perhaps the earliest references to the eyes as windows on the soul come from Cicero in the last days of the Roman Republic, who in the passage I'm going to read you is expanding on the nature of oratory, what I'm trying to achieve at this very moment. Formal speech making. This is what he says. The countenance itself is entirely dominated by the eyes. For delivery, oratory, is wholly the concern of the feelings, and these are mirrored by the face and expressed by the eyes. So let's start our little voyage into mind reading with a few reflections of perhaps the greatest of all neuroscientists. I refer, of course, to William Shakespeare. We should not forget that one important dimension of mind reading involves reading the mind from the inside, introspection. But this isn't more reliable than any other forms of mind reading because of the tendency we humans have for self-justification and indeed for self-deception. Hamlet, confronting his mother, Queen Gertrude, with the infamy of the murder of his father and of what Hamlet regards as her incest with her new husband, his father's brother, elicits this response, this famous response from Gertrude. "O Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turn'st my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their tinct." In Macbeth, we find Duncan lamenting his inability to detect treason in one of his courtiers. There is no art, he says, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Helena insists, love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid blind. Helena is saying that love is not interested in superficialities like beauty, which is only skin deep, but in what lies behind. Love springs from imagined understanding, often leavened with a strong yeast of hope or optimism about the nature of what lies beneath the surface, beyond the physical gaze. But she also insists that only the mind can deliver the required understanding of what others are like. But it is in the great play Richard III that Shakespeare comes nearest to my present preoccupations. Richard, newly crowned but insecure, wants another English nobleman, Buckingham's, approval of the murder of the little princes in the Tower, who are actually the legitimate heirs to the crown that he at that time is wearing. And he says, "Ah, Buckingham, now do I play the touch indeed, to try if thou be current gold. Young Edward lives, think now what I would speak." That is to say, read my mind. He doesn't want to have to spell out that he wants the princes murdered, but he hopes his courtier, like all good courtiers, will anticipate his desires and just do it. But Buckingham is a bit obtuse, and later, in another remark to Buckingham, he says, "I wish the bastard's dead," and would have it suddenly performed. It's probably correct that we are a long way from a neuroscientific breakthrough in mind reading. However, recent developments in neuroscience, and in particular in brain imaging, have created expectations that, for example, criminal intent might be detectable in brain states. If this were really possible, which I personally doubt, then these might be used as evidence justifying restraint or detention prior to any offense being committed. Now, I served on an interesting working party of the United Kingdom Premier Academy of Science, the Royal Society. It was a project which delivered 4 reports, and the project was called Brainwaves. And one of those reports was on the neuroscientific impact on the criminal law. And we concluded in those reports that it wasn't very likely that neuroscience for quite a long time would be of service to the criminal law. Now, in a part of the paper I'm not going to deliver, I should, by the way, have said that this paper is co-authored with my colleague David, who's here. Is David in the room? He's waving over there. David Lawrence. So, largely the bit that I'm not going to read to you is the bit that he wrote, so I apologize to him for that. And of course, it's the bit with all the good bits in it, not the bit that I'm forcing you to listen to. Shakespeare, perennially occupied with mind reading, as I hope I've convinced you, was somewhat enigmatic himself, perhaps because of the universality of his themes. But the English poet William Wordsworth, in a famous sonnet, suggests that Shakespeare's sonnets are the key to understanding the mind of Shakespeare. And he said this very appropriately in a poem called The Sonnet. Scorn not the sonnet, critic, you have frowned, mindless of its just honours. With this key, Shakespeare unlocked his heart. And here we have reached the nub of the argument that I want to present this evening. And you will be relieved to hear the end of poetry. It is in our writings and our interest in the writings and recorded thoughts and actions of others that our minds can be read and sometimes misread. I want to suggest to you that it is actually the internet, the cloud, that is for the foreseeable future likely to be the most effective source of mind reading available to us, and a very effective source of mind reading indeed. In short, we don't need neuroscience. We already have a massive capacity for mind reading from which there is no effective defense. And here I'm speaking of those aspects of our minds, my mind and yours, that have been digitized, that have gone into the cloud to be retrieved by anybody capable of accessing them from there. There is no defense. Anything that has ever been on a computer can be hacked. If we think about what data most of us have consigned to the cloud, the list can be alarming. Just think about it. Most of us now write on digitizing kit, computers, tablets, phones. Most of us also write and receive emails, tweets, and so on. Many have a web presence, a Facebook page, or a Twitter account. Moreover, the cloud contains a record of all the websites that we have ever visited, of things we have ordered online. Many of us fill in our tax returns online, pay fines for traffic offenses online, visit online medical services. We look up medical conditions online, order drugs and services online. The whole pattern of our lives is in the clouds, and competent people can always retrieve it from there. I want to end with one telling example, a very recent example, which is the example that set me thinking along these lines. It was a news story which broke in the British press on the 21st of March of this year, not very long ago. The BBC reported that, quote, a woman who threw acid in the face of a friend while wearing a veil as a disguise has been jailed for 12 years. The conviction of this woman, Mary Konya, for the assault on her friend, in scare quotes, Naomi Oni, was widely reported. The victim of this terrible attack, who was scarred for life, had been disbelieved by the police because they examined her laptop hard drive and found that she had looked at plastic surgery websites, and indeed websites that described the fate of another young woman, Katie Piper, quite a celebrity in the United Kingdom, who in 2008, as was widely reported in the press, was raped by a man she'd met online, and then he arranged for someone else to throw acid in her face. They thought, because Naomi Oni had consulted these sites, that she was self-harming to get attention, and they dropped the investigation. Very recently, the investigation was revived and the perpetrator was prosecuted. Now, the police in this case were guilty of an error of inference, one of the most common errors to which all humankind, including some people in this room, are subject. And moreover, the cloud simply contains data, often without context. However, it's there, and if you really want to know about others, that's where you should look. There you can see the contents of their diaries if they're electronic. You can see what they've bought. You can see what they've looked at. You can make speculation, quite accurate speculation, about the sort of gaze that was being directed at what they looked at online. And I don't think this, I think of it as a danger, has been adequately thought about in bioethical circles. People rather concentrate on neuroscience and what it might do with deep brain stimulation and brain scanning and stuff like this. That's not where our secrets are. They are in the cloud, and as the chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, once aptly said, the cloud has no delete button. Once our thoughts, once our digitized data is in the cloud, it is available forever, as far as anybody knows. It can't be deleted. Just one final remark. No, I think that's enough. You'll be familiar with the there was a recent decision in the European Court which allowed for privacy stuff that had been put on the web to be deleted by Google. But all that does is take it off particular websites. It doesn't remove it from the cloud altogether. So though there is this very radical new piece of legislation, it won't protect you. So this is my final message to you. If you want to protect yourselves from others knowing a great deal, I mean a great deal, about you, there is one recourse that you have, and it's quite effective, but not totally effective, and that is be very boring. If you are not of interest to the newspapers, they won't go searching for your data. Unfortunately, it's not possible, despite one's very best endeavors, always to be sufficiently boring not to interest others. Thank you very much.